Well, tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of President Roosevelt's executive order creating the World War II internment camps where tens of thousands of Japanese, many American citizens, were held as prisoners.
KPIX 5 anchor Alan Martin here with how the Bay Area played a part in that dark chapter of American history and why we should all remember. Alan?
Sarah, Ryan, the Day of Remembrance began in Washington State back in the late 70s. Now, in 1986, California made it an officially designated day in our state. And special events and exhibits are marking the occasion with the somber importance the date deserves.
America's Day of Infamy turned into a time of tragedy for Japanese Americans and Japanese citizens living in the U.S. The bombing of Pearl Harbor led to President Roosevelt signing an executive order 2 months later, creating 10 internment camps. Cal State East Bay history professor Linda Ivey says it's a day not to be forgotten.
The executive order was signed by the president and orchestrated after that by the military. But this was a reflection of decades of really severe anti-Asian prejudice along the West Coast. That's really what fed it.
She says one of the striking things about the government's action was how fast it all happened, but not so fast that it wasn't documented by one of America's most famous Depression-era photojournalists, Dorothea Lange. A new exhibit at the San Mateo County History Museum called Japanese Internment at Tanforan shows America's rush to judgment, the rounding up of thousands of Japanese Americans on the West Coast, and how they were imprisoned, some at the old racetrack in San Bruno, where former horse stalls were converted into holding cells for humans. They waited for months to be moved again to the government's newly built and more permanent prison camps.
In many cases, families lost all of their property, lost personal property. Your businesses would be disrupted, your careers disrupted, your childhood disrupted. It was a devastating thing to happen to families in our country.
Today, there are plans for a more lasting memorial at the Tanforan site, but it can't cover over the permanent scars of an injustice brought by our own country on our own citizens.
The internment of the Japanese, and this executive order allowed for this to happen, is really one of the most egregious violations of civil rights in our country's history.
Now, the Tanforan detention facility operated for 5 months, and at one point of the nearly 8,000 people held there, half of them were in those converted horse stalls. We should mention tomorrow afternoon at 3, San Jose will hold its Day of Remembrance ceremony virtually. They're calling it Overcoming Hate and Fear. Sarah?